Hey guys, slide the phone onto night mode, pull that blanket up, and get ready to time travel to one of the strangest, roughest, most self-inflicted bits of medieval misery you never saw in a video game cutscene. That's right, tonight we're marching with the Flagellants. You, barefoot on cobbles, back streaked with your own blood, lungs filling with incense and panic, chanting hymns you only half understand, while 1,000 terrified villagers watch from windows and silently hope you don't drip on their doorframes. Spoiler, you wouldn't last till sunset.
So before you commit emotionally or physically, don't try this at home. Go ahead and tap like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely dig these late-night historical reality checks. And drop a comment with your local time zone so I can see who's listening while I talk about people whipping their own skin off at 3 a.m. Now dim the lights, maybe crack a window for that cool hint of midnight air, and let's shuffle into the darkness together.
First myth to throw out the stained glass window, the flagellant movements weren't constant, quaint, pious background noise in the Middle Ages. They flared up, burned bright, and died down like spiritual brush fires whenever Europe felt specially doomed. Plague, famine, looming apocalypse, or just a bad harvest plus an eclipse. And when they ignited, they spread faster than gossip in a monastery scriptorium. One day your town square's a quiet place for wool markets. Next morning, boom, 200 shuffling penitents in linen hoods are moaning psalms and turning the cobblestones red. They called themselves Disciplinati, Crucifratres, or simply the Brethren of the Cross. Nice branding, right? But nobody on the street needed the Latin. They saw robes hacked open at the back, blood weeping down to the hem, ropes squeezing purple around bare ankles, and they knew exactly what was going on. A public plea for mercy addressed straight to God by way of shredded human skin. Not metaphorically, literally. How did you get recruited? Easy, fear. Maybe the Black Death has eaten half your family. Maybe the war taxes never stop. Maybe your priest keeps murmuring about celestial signs and the wrath of Christ. Somewhere a charismatic wanderer preaches that God will only cancel the apocalypse if everyone repents with maximum sincerity. And nothing says sincerity like flogging your spine to pulp while chanting the Miserere. You nod along because your neighbor just buried 5 children in 1 week, and the parish graveyard looks like an artichoke patch of fresh mounds. So you sign up. Boom! You're in the procession. But before you even set foot on the road, the rules hit you like a chunk of cathedral masonry. Rule 1. You surrender every shred of personal identity. Fancy tunic? Swap it for a plain white linen smock. Slit down the back so the whip has an unblocked runway. Shoes? Nope. You walk barefoot because humility tastes better with gravel. Jewelry? Forget it. Even a belt buckle shaped like a lion is pride, and pride is half the reason God's smiting everyone, remember? So now you're dressed like a DIY ghost costume, minus any adorable pillowcase charm. Rule 2. Compulsory chanting. Not Gregorian choir pretty chanting. We're talking raw, nasal, monotone verses that loop for hours until your brain feels like porridge. The lyrics revolve around guilt, wrath, blood, and mercy. Basically a medieval Spotify playlist titled Ultimate Penitential Bops. Fall out of rhythm and the master disciplinarian, the guy who leads the march with an iron cross, shoots you a glare that strips warmth from your bones. Rule 3. The Scourge. Picture a short wooden handle bound with 3 leather thongs, each tipped with a little iron barb. Think
Cat o' Nine Tails Junior Edition. It's yours now, personal and non-transferable. You will swing it over your shoulder in a perfect arc. Let the tails wrap across your back. Then yank downward so the hooks rip skin instead of bounce off. That technique is drilled before dawn on day 1. Mess it up, maybe you merely bruise, not break the surface, and the oversight gets corrected by a brother behind you who delivers a helpful demo across your shoulders. Peer mentoring, medieval style. Rule 4. No beds, no baths, no speaking except the song. Processions last 33.5 days in some outbreaks, 1 day for each year Christ supposedly walked the earth. At night you sleep in barns, church naves, open fields, whatever God provides. You eat donated bread, onions, and occasionally dried fish. You do not bandage the wounds. Infected stripes, buzzing flies, and a smell like damp butcher paper? That's the point. Visible suffering is your sermon.
Rule 5. Obedience. The movement runs on military discipline. If the leader kneels, everyone slams to the dirt. If he extends his scourge, everyone thrashes in unison, counting each lash out loud. Miss a count? Start over. Your back is now a math problem. Still sure you'd survive? Let's do a reality check. Afternoon slog, 15 miles of rutted road. The sun bakes congealed scabs into stiff epoxy. Dust cakes to you like breading. Flies orbit. Whenever you cross a bridge, local merchants eyeball you for plague symptoms. They've heard rumors these processions spread disease faster than they stop it. They aren't wrong. Open wounds plus shared cups equals epidemiological nightmare. But fear of divine wrath equals fear of contagion, so they let you pass. Late day, another scourging set. This time 41 lashes, representing Christ's wounds including the spear thrust. Your arms a dead weight. You improvise by yanking with body torque. Hooks dig deeper. You slip on your own blood, faceplant, chip a tooth. A brother helps you up, but offers no consolation. Pain is prayer, denture budget be damned. Evening. Camp beside a ruined field where locusts eat the crop last summer. Symbolic location? Probably. The master reads from Revelation about plagues of scorpions. Perfect bedtime story. You lie on your stomach because backsleeping is no longer an option. Fever sets in. Someone nearby coughs wetly through the night, likely pneumonia or plague. Good luck. Day 2 dawns identical, only your body's reserve tank is half empty. Repeat process. By day 4, you're delirious. By day 6, infections blossom like red flowers around every lash. Some marchers smear clay on wounds. Others welcome the rot, believing quicker death equals express ticket to paradise. You start hallucinating. Maybe see the Virgin Mary in the sunrise, or smell roasted meat that isn't there. The line between mystical vision and septic dream blurs fast at 102-degree fever. And we haven't even hit week 2 when the civic authorities start cracking down. See, bishops and civic councils eventually decide the flagellants are causing more chaos than piety. People skip work, crime rises in deserted neighborhoods, and, oh yeah, whipping your back open in the street might look suspiciously like challenging church authority. So edicts roll out. Processions outlawed. Participants excommunicated. Congratulations, now you're both sick and technically heretical. Soldiers arrive to break up the march outside a walled city. They block the gate. The master argues that divine penitence outranks local laws. The captain counters with crossbows. Tension crackles. Ultimately, the city solves the standoff by granting 1 hour of whipping inside the moat, followed by mandatory dispersal. You perform the lashes in front of cheering peasants who gossip about how thin you look. Your living theater, half holy, half horror show. At this point, your odds of making it a full 33 days hover near coin flip territory. Statistically, a chunk of participants will collapse from blood poisoning, exposure, or exhaustion. Others will bail quietly, slip into a tavern, reconsider theology over ale, and never rejoin. The hardcore remain, stumbling toward the next county, convinced they're single-handedly postponing apocalypse. Spoiler: the apocalypse keeps scheduling updates anyway. Plague waves ignore your sacrifices. Crops still fail. Comets still blaze across the night sky. In a few decades, papal bulls outright ban flagellant fraternities as breeding grounds for revolt. They go underground, resurface during later pandemics, fade again. And the cycle of hope, fear, and self-harm whores on. So yeah, still think you could handle a single day? Remember, we haven't even explored the deeper theology, the social backlash, the bizarre medical theories about cleansing humors through lashes, or the secret hand signs these brotherhoods use to recognize each other on the road. That's plenty of grim mileage we haven't marched yet. All right, let's drag our cracked heels back onto the blood-spotted road and pick up the march. Part 2. Same procession, same sleepless medieval nightmare. But now the sun's higher, the scabs are tighter, and the flagellant's chant has dropped half an octave because raw throats can't reach last night's pitch. This stretch of the journey isn't only about pain management. It's about the machinery behind the misery. How a grassroots cyclone of guilt, rumor, and half-learned scripture spins itself into an organized spiritual flash mob that scares bishops, bankrupts taverns, and accidentally becomes the Middle Ages' loudest public health hazard. Lace up, metaphorically, no shoes allowed, and let's stagger on. First, zoom out from the immediate agony to the hidden infrastructure. A flagellant surge looks spontaneous, but behind the moaning chorus sits a skeleton of logistics tough enough to rival a crusade supply chain. Someone has to map routes that hit maximum population density without county militias. Someone copies the standardized hymn sheets, Latin verses on cheap paper smeared with lampsuit ink, and passes them from cell to cell like underground rave flyers. Someone pre-negotiates barns for sleeping, wheat quotas for porridge, and side deals with sympathetic friars who unlock church doors after curfew. At the core is the Magister Disciplinae, the master of discipline. Think drill sergeant, quartermaster, hype man, spiritual life coach, and booking agent rolled together under one lice-ridden hood. He memorizes road conditions, border tolls, village feast days, and which local lords lost relatives to plague. Those are prime fundraising opportunities. Grief loosens purse strings. If he miscalculates, the whole procession risks starving or getting ambushed by town guards wielding ordinances from the bishop of the next diocese over. But when he nails the timing, arriving at sunset just as bells toll Compline, the spectacle lands with cinematic perfection and rumors rocket ahead to the next valley, ensuring bigger crowds and bigger alms. Money? Oh yes, there's an economy humming beneath all the penitential rhetoric. Coins flung into the collection sack, bankroll candles, parchment, fresh scourges, replacement smocks, Bloodstains eventually stiffen into cardboard, and bribes when city councils refuse entry. Master Disciplinai keeps ledgers in a code so dense even he forgets what half the squiggles mean, because you can't admit you're building a shadow budget to finance public acts the Pope has started calling dangerously unsupervised. Meanwhile, a cottaged industry blooms around the march. Peddlers follow at a safe distance, hawking vinegar wash, cheap icons of Christ's wounded side, and ironically soft leather sandals for spectators whose empathy extends only as far as their arches.
Now, theology. Why whip it all? Medieval Catholics already had confession booths and indulgence charts. But a century of non-stop crisis, Little Ice Age crop failures, war taxes, papal schisms, left folks certain that ordinary penance was a leaky roof in a cosmic hailstorm. Along came apocalyptic preachers waving dog-eared copies of Joachim of Fiore's prophecies, yelling that the Antichrist was currently shaving before work. They stitched biblical precedents together. Elijah covering himself in sackcloth, Ninevites repenting with ashes. Add a dash of contemporary grim mathematics. If God killed half of Europe with the plague, he's clearly still in a smiting mood. Ergo, dial pain to 11. The lash becomes a physical debit card. Each droplet of blood equals one sin burned off the cosmic ledger. And maybe some of the neighbor's sins, too, if the splash radius is wide enough.
Medical science, for its part, contributes a parade of contradictory endorsements and condemnations. One barber surgeon traveling with the procession insists the repeated bleeding vents excess black bile and therefore prevents plague buboes, kind of a medieval homeopathic bleed-for-health routine. A university-trained physician in Bologna fires back that open wounds invite miasma, effectively vacuuming pestilence straight into the bloodstream. They debate in pamphlets that nobody in the actual procession can read. On the ground, brothers default to the more convincing argument. The plague hasn't struck their column yet, therefore the regiment of lash and march must be working. Correlation is king when blind desperation needs statistics.
But desperation breeds heresy in the eyes of clergy guarding orthodoxy like a precious reliquary tooth. Flagellant theology sidelines the sacrament of confession. Why whisper sins to a parish priest when you can broadcast repentance through raw nerve endings? Bishops smell a mutiny of relevance. They convene synods, issue bulls, instruct inquisitors to take notes from city walls. Yet crackdowns only add forbidden allure. Nothing boosts recruitment like ecclesiastical outrage. The archbishop banned them? They must be on to something. By 1349, processions across the Rhineland are so numerous they snarl trade routes. Merchants complain their carts can't pass because the roads are clogged with sobbing penitents bleeding into wagon ruts.
Let's zoom back to you, hypothetical marcher, now on day 9. Your wounds weep yellow serum, but you've stopped flinching. Pain pathways overloaded, replaced by a dull electrical hum in the spine. Paradoxically, your mind feels light, almost euphoric. Historians call it dissociation, mystics call it rapture. You think you spot an angel where the dust cloud meets sunlight. Might be heat stroke, might be your brain releasing endorphins like a medieval opioid binge. Either way, you're briefly convinced the whipping works. That conviction radiates outward. Villagers line the ditches and weep because your serenity looks supernatural. A mother of 4 dead children presses her last silver pfennig into your palm. You barely notice until later when the steward pries it from clenched fingers to drop in the communal chest. Night falls in a riverside meadow. Protocol, Brothers arrange torches in a circle, illuminating a rough-hewn crucifix hammered into the turf. The magister reads letters from distant towns. Brethren in Spire report 30 new recruits. Plague deaths there halted since their arrival. The assembly murmurs praise through cracked lips. Whether the stats are vetted doesn't matter. Information laundering existed long before printing presses. Hope outranks accuracy. Then comes the ghost chant. Each marcher steps forward, confesses one's sin in a whisper to the wooden cross. No priest needed. After confession, you scourge again, this time until the torch smoke turns the air near black. The visual is primal. Silhouettes whipping themselves in flickering orange gloom. Blood sparkling like rubies in rotating light. It imprints on every spectator's memory and shows up decades later in woodcuts drawn by artisans who were children in the crowd tonight. But drama cuts both ways. 10 leagues east, a nobleman's son has joined a procession against family orders. His furious father hires 10 mounted men to retrieve him. They overtake the column at dawn, swinging clubs. Chaos erupts. Pious penitents scramble, dropping scourges for the first time in days. The son is hauled away screaming liturgical fragments, while his fellow marchers kneel and beg God to forgive the violence. They mustn't retaliate with fists, only backs. Word of this outrage spreads faster than anything. Serfs mutter that lords fear humble holiness. Lords grumble that mobs threaten social order. Threads of political revolution weave themselves into the flayed linen almost overnight. With suspicion thickening, city magistrates escalate. Some require quarantine tents outside walls. Others demand inspection of wounds to ensure no one's intentionally spreading plague via concealed pustules. There's a rumor of secret Jews hiding inside processions so they can bleed on wells, a paranoid invention that leads to pogroms unrelated to any actual evidence. Misery always invites scapegoats, and the flagellant roadshow drags them into unfortunate spotlight. Now let's dissect the secret hand signals. Because chapters of Disciplinati pop up across borders, they need a handshake to confirm legitimacy. Call it medieval brand authentication. One common gesture: touch right shoulder, left breast, right hip in a crooked triangle, echoing the lash's diagonal path. Another: draw a small cross on the brow with the first knuckle of the scourging hand. If the skin flakes off faint scab crust, you're evidently in. Cryptic hoods, perforated eye holes sometimes shaped into teardrops, help hide identities when secular authorities start doling out prison sentences for vagrancy or blasphemy. Members memorize psalm numbers as passwords. Recite verse 51:7. If the stranger replies, "Purge me with hyssop," he's genuine. If he blinks, he's maybe an informer. And yes, informers exist. Papal legates plant spies who observe lash counts to confirm rumors of doctrinal deviance. Do the brothers invoke Mary properly, or talk about a new covenant revealed through pain alone? A single phrasing misstep can classify them as flagrant heretics. Reports funnel to Avignon or Rome, depending which pope currently sits on the see. Schism years double the paperwork. Eventually, the pontiff issues an official condemnation. Processions are forbidden without episcopal approval. Public self-scourging declared a parody of the true faith. Mass arrests follow. Some disciplinati scatter into forests, forming clandestine communes, meeting under moonlight beside crossroads shrines. The movement fractures, leaving behind only legends, ballads, and bone-deep scars. But let's haul ourselves back to that hypothetical you on day 12, staggering through a fog-choked valley in Alsace. Your body is basically a geography of wounds, raised purple ridges intersecting like cartographic contour lines across your shoulders. Each lash delivered fresh agony, but each healed line stiffens into armor of scar tissue. Older members' backs are quilted with overlapping hard welts. Call it the red fabric of devotion. When they walk, smocks don't flutter. They cling, fused to dried serum. Removing the tunic at night means peeling flesh, so most simply never remove it. Privacy is pride anyway. On the medical front, you've developed a smell: sour, metallic, fungal. It travels ahead of the chorus, announcing penitence before the chant reaches earshot. Dogs whimper, wine cellars pinch noses, but some devout souls inhale the odor like incense, convinced holiness has a fragrance of iron and decay. Apothecaries watch from shop thresholds, mentally tallying future revenue. They know infected stripes convert to lucrative salves. Meanwhile, local physicians debate new case studies. Patient exhibits necrosis yet maintains ambulatory stamina. Psychological fervor apparently increases systemic resilience. They'll publish treatises blaming or praising the lash for everything from hysteria to spontaneous charismatic glossolalia. Politics intensify. A burger council invites your procession for a controlled demonstration inside the city walls. Tourist trap spirituality. They promise alms, fresh bread, even a cask of wine. But they strip away your command structure. Local clergy will lead, lashes limited to 7 each. Wounds must be washed with vinegar to prevent pestilence. Half the brethren refuse. Diluting devotion is apostasy. The column splits. Your group, hardliners, shoelessly trudges onward into the forest, singing louder to prove righteousness. Schism inside schism. Nights grow colder. Frost forms tiny daggers on chin stubble. You barely notice because your favor cycles create internal heat spikes. Dreams blur with waking hallucinations. You see Christ walking beside the ranks, stooping to kiss each wound. Maybe it's spiritual ecstasy. Maybe septicemia crossing the blood-brain barrier. Doesn't matter. Story spreads that a luminous figure was seen among you. Villagers call it a miracle, and by next dawn, new recruits have appeared from parish doorways begging admission. Initiation is immediate. They slice open their fresh linen, accept the scourge, and by evening their backs look like steaks left too long on a grill. We've talked logistics, theology, medicine, politics. Let's probe psychology. Why does the lash feel like redemption? Medieval society equates hierarchy with divine blueprint: kings, bishops, husbands, even seasons. Catastrophe means the blueprint's torn. Chaos leaks through. Self-punishment, weirdly, is an assertion of control within that chaos. You can't stop plague spores, but you can command your arm to rise and fall. Each welt is a ledger entry. I did something. I traded flesh for order. There's addictive satisfaction, endorphin bursts plus communal affirmation. The chant merges your failing heartbeat with dozens of others, a drum circle of suffering. In that unity, fear of isolation, the deepest terror of plague winters, briefly dissolves. But illusions crack eventually. On day 17, a revered elder collapses mid-lash, ribs poking through paper-thin skin, eyes glazed. The master intones a prayer but doesn't halt the ceremony. The body is hauled aside like earlier casualties. You witness this and feel the first ember of doubt. If holiness is measured by suffering, why wasn't that elder bulletproof? The question simmers under your hood. No time to wrestle with it. The chant resumes. By the 3-week mark, external persecution reaches fever pitch. Word of papal condemnation filters through. All unlicensed flagellants to be excommunicated and, if resisting dispersal, treated as rebels. Some towns now greet you with crossbow-armed militias forbidding entry. You camp outside ditch lines drinking ditch water. Dysentery ignites through ranks, our old friend intestinal catastrophe. The scourged backs now share misery with scourged bowels. Nobody changes course, they just add frequent detours into hedgerows. A contingent of moderate brothers propose sending emissaries to Rome to seek official blessing. The hardliners argue authority lies in blood, not parchment. Another schism. Splinter groups peel away like bark from a dying tree. Pretty soon, the procession is 4 ragged clusters, half thinking about heading home in shame, half convinced stopping now would damn them permanently. You weigh your options through fever haze. Home? Nothing left. Fields fallow, family graves. Forward? Only more road, more lash. One night storm clouds hammer the camp. Lightning splits a nearby oak. Thunder silences the chant mid-verse. Some interpret it as divine applause. Others think warning. You stand in mud, scourge dangling, face tilted to rain washing clotted blood from hair. The water feels like baptism, but instead of cleansing, it reveals how little original skin remains unscarred. You're rewriting yourself in crimson script. The next morning, rumor arrives. Plague has returned to the capital despite weeks of processions. Cognitive dissonance hits like blunt mace. Some rationalize. God demands longer atonement. Others suspect Judas-like corruption among leadership. A few quietly desert under the guise of seeking medicine for infected comrades. Desertion spreads. The procession's chant thins to a handful of hoarse voices. And yet the Master keeps marching. He quotes Isaiah, "I have set my face like flint." Flint indeed. His back is a single scab, limbs trembling, but his grip on the cross-staff is iron. You wonder whether he believes or simply fears stopping. Momentum can masquerade as faith long after conviction has bled out. Approaching the border of another principality, soldiers block the bridge and read a decree. Flagellants may not pass. Violators will be arrested, property confiscated. Property? Nobody here owns more than a rope belt. Still, the order stands. The Master kneels, refuses to disband. Crossbow strings creak. A tense eternity. Finally, a compromise. You can cross singly, unarmed, surrendering whips. The Master's eyes fill with tears. He cannot surrender the instrument of salvation. 2 brothers tackle him, pry the scourge free, toss it into the river, and drag him across before archers loose arrows. On the far bank he convulses, half from grief, half malaria. Authority has shattered. In the days that follow, the column disintegrates. Some limp toward monasteries seeking proper confession. Others crawl into forest hermitages, convinced civilization itself is damned. A lucky few stumble into sympathetic villages where nuns clean wounds with wine and thyme. You? You wake up in a straw cell run by brothers of a hospital order who gently inform you that many of your fellows have died. They clip the crusted smock from your body, submerge you in medicinal brine, and whisper conventional theology about God's mercy through sacraments, not whips. Fever breaks. Reality trickles back. Months later, you're hobbling home, back a tapestry of scars thicker than leather. The procession feels like a hallucination, yet market squares buzz with talk of it. Artists carving miniatures of hooded penitents for pilgrims. The movement's outlawed, but lives on in rumor. Some claim old brothers still meet on Good Friday, stripping to lash in candlelit barns before dawn. You try lifting a whip again. Arm trembles, stomach churns. The pain once felt holy. Now it feels like memory of a cult you barely escaped. You kneel in an ordinary church, speak confession to an ordinary priest, receive ordinary penance of prayers. It feels insufficient, but safe. Out in the nave, children chase each other. Life wins. Meanwhile, the church convenes councils, codifies bans, and funnels grassroots terror into controlled rituals, processional reenactments of Christ's Passion with minor self-flagellation allowed under clerical supervision. The raw movement calcifies into liturgy. What was wildfire becomes incense. And yet, every time plague whispers around the edges of Europe, rumors stir. Hooded shadows marching by torchlight in remote valleys, chanting that desperate monotone, trading soles of their feet for a bargaining chip with heaven. Because fear is cyclical, and somewhere, someone always believes pain might earn a cosmic coupon. Dawn cracks over an ordinary market town in the Rhineland, and the first thing the townsfolk see, before spilled milk, before quarrels over turnip prices, is a frescoer scrambling up a wooden scaffold to repaint an entire chapel wall. Yesterday the bishop's men whitewashed it. Today the Masons Guild has hired this artist to layer back the reds and ochres that the ecclesiastical purge erased. What was so dangerous about the image? A clutch of hooded penitents, backs striped red, stepping in perfect unison toward a looming Christ who lifts two fingers in blessing. Officially, the diocese condemns such scenes as seduction into rash imitation. Unofficially, parishioners demanded their icon. They've tasted plague. They want a God who sees wounds as currency. This tug-of-war between censors and memory is the pulse of Europe now. No sooner does the Church issue a ban than local piety finds a detour. Pain has become portable theology, smuggled in hymn lyrics, carved into misericords under choir stalls, embroidered onto altar frontals where angels discreetly grip miniature scourges behind fluttering wings. Even children's sidewalk songs borrow the cadence of flagellant refrains. Miserere, miserere, the rats all dance and the fleas drink tea. They don't know what it means, they only know it rhymes, which is how trauma passes from one generation to the next without parents noticing. Scholar monks in Paris scramble to intellectualize the phenomenon. Peter of Les Halles drafts a treatise arguing that self-scourging is a natural pharmacon, an emotional purgative comparable to bloodletting. He stacks case notes. Survivors report calmer dreams, lower pulse, sharper memory for Scripture. His colleague Giraldus retorts that the same survivors show staph infections, septic fevers, and an alarming propensity to hallucinate the Archangel Michael handing out whip upgrades. Their debate trickles downstream into medical faculties, and by 1390, every respectable university in Christendom requires anatomy students to memorize a table correlating lash counts with probability of gangrene.
The numbers are invented but gain authority by repetition, and soon merchants are shipping alum, honey, and myrrh in larger quantities because professors prescribed them as the only tri-herbal salve proven to seal righteousness into the lesion.
While academics count scabs, traveling poets turn them into metaphor. A Provençal troubadour sings of unrequited love. His heart is flayed like a penitent's shoulder. A Tuscan allegorist composes a dream vision in which a woman named Caritas leads a brigade of self-lashers against the allegorical serpent of pestilence, beating its scales until they glitter like saintly halos. Scribes illuminate the parchment with tiny gold flecks at each point where whip meets snake, an early example of gore rendered as visual redemption.
Then there are the imitation cults sprouting like mushrooms after rain. In Ferrara, a group calling itself I Purificatori stages nighttime parades that blend penitence with pageant. They choreograph steps, 3 shuffling paces, 1 full-body bow, and time every lash to a drum so deep it thumps the ribs of spectators. City fathers tolerate the spectacle because tourism spikes. Vintners sell twice as much mulled wine on procession nights. But ecclesiastical authorities fume. When repentance becomes choreography, where is the line between sacrament and spectacle? They dispatch inquisitors who stand in the crowd, tallying lash synchronization as evidence of improper theatricality. Improper or not, the rhythm is contagious. Across the Alps, German artisans adopt the Ferraren style but swap drums for hammers, hitting anvils, forging a sonic link between bodily steel and smithy steel. They call themselves Hammerbruder, Hammer Brothers, claiming Saint Eligius as patron. On Good Friday, they clang and lash until sparks and blood commingled in the torchlight, a blacksmith's Stations of the Cross. The authorities debate whether that counts as liturgical innovation or industrial hazard. For every flamboyant offshoot, quieter forms take root in monastic cells. The Carthusians, always fond of restraint, integrate mild self-flagellation into their Friday devotions, but tuck the scourge inside the sleeve so only a faint swish betrays the act. They replace iron barbs with waxed linen knots, pain enough to focus prayer, not enough to rupture skin. A Jesuit spiritual director later borrows this measured mortification for his manual, Scala Interioris, framing it as a ladder of interior ascent, each knot a rung toward mystical union. His chapter on hygiene, Wash the Whip Weekly in Vinegar, spawns a cottage industry for scented penance kits sold near cathedral steps. Merchants stock rosewater for nuns, cedarwood for friars, myrrh for ambitious laymen.
Meanwhile, the flagellant's organizational skeleton never quite dissolves. Ex magistri disciplinae reinvent themselves as freelance revivalists, wandering from famine-struck county to rebellion-plagued town. Their pitch evolves. Less doomsday, more personal breakthrough. 30 lashes to heal your land, they promise burghers fearing crop blight. Where civil war rages, they repackage the lash as a truce ritual. Opposing militias whip themselves side by side to prove humility before negotiating borders. Chronicles of the Hussite Wars mention Czech and German soldiers stripping armor to lash in silent rows. The next morning, they still slaughter one another. But historians note hostilities paused long enough for both camps to share vinegar wash and psalm chant. That pause becomes legend, an eerie footnote on the absurd proximity of piety and violence. Governmental reactions diverge by crisis level. When the plague's second eruption slams Venice, the Doge himself authorizes a state-sponsored procession, limited lash count, mandatory physician escort, guild-funded bandages. Senators argue it's cheaper than mass burials and might appease heaven. Across the Adriatic, Dubrovnik outlaws flagellation entirely, fearing tourism collapse. They fine violators 10 ducats and sentence repeat offenders to rowing galleys, creating a perverse incentive because galley wages include daily rations of wine, which some penitents interpret as divine reward for perseverance. By mid-15th century, painters who witnessed childhood processions are masters in their craft, and those memories seep onto canvas. Piero della Francesca's Burial of Christ buries a thin line of tiny whip marks across the back of Joseph of Arimathea, unnoticed unless the viewer steps close. It's a secret homage. The procession is outlawed, but art remembers. In the Low Countries, a workshop under Roger van der Weyden produces altarpieces where John the Baptist's camel hair tunic is rendered with the same brush texture as flagellant hoods, a textile wink linking wilderness prophet and medieval penitent. Somewhere between art studio and surgical ward stands the figure of Sister Margareta of Lübeck, a former flagellant who enters a hospital convent tending plague victims. She writes letters describing memory pain, old lash scars flaring whenever a patient coughs blood. Physicians dismiss it, theologians obsess. Is this involuntary recollection proof that the lash carved sin deep enough to echo through time? Her confessor publishes excerpts, minus personal gore, as Meditaciones de Flagello. Within years, it's on every mystic's reading list, overshadowing its medical observations with poetic gloss. But the Inquisition never rests. In 1484, Inquisitor Heinrich Kramer, yes, he of Malleus Maleficarum fame, drafts a memorandum suggesting that clandestine flagellant cells harbor witches who milk penitential blood for filters. The claim lacks evidence but lands like a thunderclap. Overnight, secular courts treat illicit scourging as potential sorcery. Some regions escalate from fines to torture-extracted confessions. In Nuremberg, 3 tailors admit under duress to selling dried stripes of backskin as love charms. Scholars later doubt the story, but pulp broadsheets sensationalize it until European audiences conflate flagellants with occultists. Blood that once proclaimed piety now hints at diabolic traffic. Pushback arises from an unexpected quarter: early print culture. Pamphleteers sympathetic to the movement mass-produced tracts illustrating the original 1349 procession as a wall between plague and people, Christ's whip turning aside death's scythe. Woodcuts depict skeletal death recoiling from a red-roped barrier woven by penitent backs. The image goes viral, the 16th century equivalent of a meme. Some presses color the blood with real cinnabar for extra punch. Authorities seize copies, but the printing press is hydra-headed. Suppression fuels demand. By 1520, Martin Luther's revolt against indulgences ironically rehabilitates flagellant precedent. If Rome sells forgiveness, maybe raw flesh testified to a more authentic economy of grace. Lutheran pamphlets mock lazy indulgences buyers, picturing them safe in feather beds while ancestral heroes bled beneath open sky. Luther himself never condones self-whipping, but nuance evaporates when polemic gets hot. Speaking of heat, climate swings again. Harvest failures in the 1540s reignite apocalyptic dread. Anabaptists in Münster incorporate controlled flagellation into their communal fasts. They argue it symbolically peels away the old Adam.
Catholic authorities scoff until rumors surface that the lash reduces appetite, stretching grain supplies. Suddenly, city councils eye the practice less as heresy, more as emergency rationing strategy. In one shattered season, theology bends to economics. Let them lash if it means fewer mouths at dinner.
Fast forward to the Counter-Reformation and the Baroque thirst for sensory overload. Spanish and Italian penance confraternities resurrect the flagellant script but weave it into grand Holy Week theaters. Processions snake through Seville with hooded Nazarenos dragging chains, backs invisibly scourged beneath crisp robes. Church officials supervise, ensuring orthodoxy while milking the spectacle for pilgrim revenue. The lash sounds muffled now, swallowed by brass bands and incense. Pain has become choreography again, but this time with papal sanction and tourist booths selling marzipan shaped like miniature scourges. Penance rendered confection. Meanwhile, in New Spain, missionaries transplant the tradition across the Atlantic. Indigenous converts witness their first disciplinantes in the courtyard of a Mexican monastery, backs streaming under desert stars. Some native communities merge the rite with pre-existing bloodletting rituals, producing hybrids that confound European chroniclers. They record Tlachichile priests adopting leather thongs tipped with obsidian flakes, striking shoulders in a rhythm echoing ancient rain dances. Colonial authorities oscillate between condemning pagan contamination and praising zealous piety. Even overseas, the lash refuses singular classification.
By the Enlightenment, rationalists scoff at flagellation as medieval excess. Voltaire derides penitents as donkeys beating themselves to prove they're stallions. Physicians publish case studies linking recurrent self-whipping to melancholia, hysteria, sexual deviance. But the Romantic movement resurrects fascination. Painters like Delacroix and Goya sketch spectral hooded figures, bodies arched in ecstatic pain, exploring the sublime boundary where terror meets transcendence. The lash, once a tool of humble repentance, transforms into aesthetic symbol, proof that intensity of feeling can explode ordinary moral categories.
Which drags us to the unquiet modern imagination. Psychologists diagnose religious self-harm disorder in case histories that mirror 14th century accounts. Filmmakers borrow flagellant imagery for horror tropes. Bleeding monks haunting catacombs. Cults whipping themselves before summoning eldritch forces. Metal bands blast riffs titled Ecstasy of the Scourged. Cosplayers at medieval fairs brandish foam flails, oblivious to the historical stink of pus and vinegar. In academic conferences, theorists debate whether the flagellant procession prefigures flash mob activism, decentralized, viral, theatrically disruptive. Hashtags replace hymn sheets, but bodies still gather to wound complacency, if only metaphorically now. Back to the quiet human level, modern dermatologists studying keloid formation cite medieval penitents as early longitudinal data. Scars photographed on preserved mummies display whip patterns identical to 15th century altarpiece figures. Medical journals confess grudging gratitude for the involuntary clinical trial those marchers conducted on themselves. Pain turned into data centuries before controlled studies existed. And what of the towns that once barred the lashers? Their archives show crime dips during procession days, everyone too busy gawking or praying. Bakery receipts climb, grain markets slump. Scribes record fewer tavern brawls, but increased midwife visits 9 months after the big parade. Sociologists argue communal emotional shock resets social bonds, prompting both abstinence and later overcompensation. In simpler terms, fear now, feast later. A penitential cycle as economic driver. Sin, whip, relief, revelry. Perhaps the strangest legacy is linguistic. In several German dialects, Geißeln, to scourge, evolves into a slang term for obsessive repetition. A composer says he's geißeling a melody when he can't stop rewriting it. Meanwhile, English absorbs flagellation into psychological jargon, then into pop culture bedroom euphemism, divorcing it entirely from medieval theology. A term once soaked in eschatological terror now tags product descriptions for faux leather cuffs. Words molt, but under UV light you can still detect medieval blood residue on the syllables. Which brings the story full circle to that frescoer on the scaffold at sunrise. He daubs vermilion for dried blood, ultramarine for twilight robes, gold leaf for halos that shimmer just above the lashers' hoods. A theologically dubious upgrade, but patrons insist. Down below, a new generation shuffles past, carrying baskets of apples, debating taxes, maybe humming that playground rhyme about rats and fleas. They don't remember the smell of vinegar on raw skin. They just know calamity could strike again. War, plague, famine, virus. And if it does, someone will propose a dramatic bodily answer. Maybe not whips, maybe masks, maybe needles, maybe 15-hour shifts in emergency wards. But the human instinct remains. Turn panic into ritual, pain into purchase, flesh into prayer. The echo of leather on spine is faint now, yet listen hard, beneath cathedral choirs, beneath protest chants, beneath your own pulse in a sleepless night of headlines, and you'll hear the cadence. Miserere me Deus. Sun beats down on the baked brick lanes of Perugia, and in the wavering air every sound feels brittle. Hooves ticking stone, shutters creaking, sparrows cracking seeds. Merchants tug awnings lower because by late afternoon the flagellants will pass and sun glare on fresh welts is bad for business. Nobody says this out loud. They frame it as civic courtesy, give the brothers shade. But everyone remembers last year's confusion when one penitent fainted mid-chant, collapsed into a basket of quince, and sticky juice drew hornets until dusk. The city has since drafted guidelines. Torchbearers every sixth marcher to mark pace. Water carriers in dark cowls to avoid confusing pilgrims with participants. And municipal sweepers tasked with picking up blood-spattered straw so tourists won't slip. Half a mile beyond the gates, the procession itself gathers in an old olive grove that smells of resinous summer. Tunics rustle like dry leaves. Volunteers lay linen on the ground any time a brother kneels to tighten his scourge handle. Bare knees on hot dust blister too fast, and blisters popping midway through a march produce a sick sweet smell that turns stomachs. The confraternity steward, Brother Leone, runs inventory. 94 flagera, 6 banners, 2 reliquaries, a splinter of the true cross, authenticated by 3 bishops, plus an unlabeled tooth rumored to be Pope Gregory's. He also tallies medical supplies. Wine for disinfecting, rosemary oil to rub into shoulders afterward, vinegar cloths for sniffing when the odor of open flesh mingles with midsummer dung. Outside observers marvel at the organization. This is corporate penance, a mobile liturgy wrapped in logistics. At the center stands the cantor, a tall Umbrian mason named Matteo, whose voice has weathered stone dust and psalms in equal measure. He runs rehearsal. Each line of Stabat Mater must overlap the crack of lash precisely by a heartbeat. So whip and hymn braid into hypnotic cadence. Novices struggle. Anticipation makes hands tremble. Matteo offers mnemonics. Inhale on mater, exhale on lacrimosa, swing on the rest. Synchronization isn't about melody. It's about keeping lungs and shoulders in rhythm so hypoxia doesn't strike before the first city square. A Jesuit observer once wrote that the real miracle of flagellation wasn't endurance of pain, but collective breathing. Hundreds of chests rising and falling like a single pair of bellows. Now, the scourges themselves. Lengths of supple cowhide, each tip knotted around an iron barb no longer than a thumbnail. The barbs come from local smiths who temper them softer than weapons, so points bend after a dozen strikes. Sharp enough to break skin, dull enough not to tunnel too deep. Excess depth, experience teaches, leads to spurting arteries, which turns penance into triage. The smiths mark each barb with tiny crosses, so users know which side is sanctified. Superstition claims a reversed barb invites demons through the wound. Whether believed or not, everyone checks. As the sun dips, the group begins to move. First, the thurifers, swinging braziers of pine resin whose smoke blurs hard edges of day, making alley mouths look like cave entrances to purgatory. Behind them, banner bearers hoist silk panels painted with crimson tears. Silk catches light so vividly that onlookers swear the tears flow. Children clutch mothers' skirts, both frightened and rapt. Then the disciplined line of bare-backed penitents emerges. They walk barefoot to heighten sensation, feet already filmed in dust the color of old parchment. The first lash falls just outside the pottery quarter, where kilns exhale hot breath into the street. Timing is intentional. Heat softens skin, opening pores, easing that initial puncture. Crack. A faint spray of red dots the ground, looking almost decorative until repetitions darken the blot. Chant rises. Ia, mater, fons amoris, triple meter. The crowd hushes as though a cathedral roof descended over the city. Now physiology becomes liturgy. After 6 strokes, capillaries rupture into tiny beads. Pain spikes, but catechism promises grace equal to each drop. Surgeons watching from corner stoops know what comes next. Adrenaline rush, slight euphoria. Some penitents sway. Stewards nudge them upright. Too much swooning disrupts symmetry, and symmetry is half the spectacle's power. Moving columns of identical suffering produce an optical spell. Citizens interpret it as divine geometry mapped onto mortal flesh. Not everyone approves. A widow in black spits at the dust. Her husband joined last year, caught infection, died babbling psalms that turned to delirious doggerel. She sees not grace, but mass mutilation. Yet even she can't ignore the hush that spreads. Bakers pause kneading. Thieves pause picking pockets. Stray dogs tuck tails. In a fragmented society, only calamity or ceremony commands such unanimous stillness. The flagellants provide both. Critics within the church dispatch theologians armed with notebooks. One Jesuit, Father Carlo, counts strokes per participant. He notes some exceed the recommended 33, one for each year of Christ. Creeping toward 50, 60, a competitive creep called scar pride. Carlo will later argue that communal penance should mirror Christ's wounds with mathematical precision. Too many lashes parody the Passion. His treatise circulates, but the laity ignore it because who can measure sincerity in integers? Night deepens, and torches replace sunlight. Flame dances on welts, making them look like ridges of molten copper. Somewhere a lute begins a minor drone, threading sound under chant. Acoustics change. Narrow streets echo, turning each lash crack into a ricochet. Residents on upper balconies feel vibrations through timber floors, as if the whole town is one resonant drum. Mothers press fingers over infants' ears. Elders mutter that such resonance unsettles ghosts. Between stations of hymn, stewards halt the line to administer water. They pour from goatskin bags onto rag strips, squeeze trickles across shoulders, washing clots so the scourge can bite cleanly again. Blood diluted with water runs pink, slithering between vertebrae, dripping into waistbands. Steam rises where liquid meets overheated skin. Herb women dab rosemary oil under penitents' noses to guard against fainting. Historians later analyze these herbs' antimicrobial properties. The flagellants stumbled onto rudimentary infection control centuries before germ theory. Meanwhile, commerce adapts. Alehouses along the route offer Pilgrim's Brew, a thin beer laced with honey and bitters, said to restore the pleated humors. Apothecaries set up sidewalk booths selling comfrey poultices, snail gel salves, poppy tinctures promising dreamless sleep later. They pay the confraternity a fee for curb rights, pain monetized in real time. Municipal ledgers record a 28% spike in street vendor taxes during procession month. The lash underwrites the city's budget better than war tariffs. Outside town, in monasteries scanning the stars for omens, astronomer monks debate whether cosmic alignments intensify devotion. Brother Raimondo charts Mars conjunct Saturn on nights of largest processional turnout. He proposes a theory: celestial spheres agitate bodily humors, compelling communities to expel excess black bile through self-harm. His abbot cautions him against astrology, but notes find their way into universities where natural philosophers graft flagellant fervor onto tides, magnetism, lunar phases. The lash becomes a data point in Renaissance science, human bodies as meteorological instruments registering unseen cosmic pressures. Contemporaneously, letters cross borders carrying gossip. A merchant from Bruges writes home about Perugia's spectacle, likening it to a crimson river flowing through stone. His letter inspires Flemish guilds to organize their own river, though in cooler climate they substitute birch rods, sting sharp, bleed less, to reduce hypothermia. Cultural diffusion rides on trade routes. By winter, Scandinavian villages invent indoor flagellation in longhouses, warmed by peat fires. Pain moderated by sauna steam. Travelers record the surreal sight of men whipping themselves while snow piles against walls outside, a paradox of heat and frost. Authorities elsewhere perceive political threat. In Avignon, papal administrators fear processions masking rebellion. Hundreds moving in disciplined ranks look perilously like militia drills. They ban whips longer than a forearm and outlaw chanting after dark. Penitents adapt. They shorten chords, whisper hymns. Crack becomes slap. Chant becomes breathy hiss. Stealth penance, no less potent for its quiet. Some locals claim the muffled version is more unsettling, like wind through cavern tunnels. The procession's endpoint tonight is Santa Maria dei Servi, a church whose crypt holds relic boxes rumored to sweat myrrh on feast days. Inside, torchlight flickers over frescoes of martyrdom. The penitents file past the altar, kneel, cross themselves with hands sticky from their own blood. One by one, they drop scourges into a cedar chest. Stewardship rules demand each whip rest 30 days before reuse, symbolic Sabbath for leather. A deacon sprinkles salt water on their backs, painful cleansing. Some sigh, some bite lips to stifle screams. Salt is cheaper than wine vinegar, but stings twice as much. Fiscal frugality meets ascetic logic. Post-ritual triage begins in an adjoining cloister where volunteer surgeons unpack iron probes, linen rolls, and a pot of boiling pitch to cauterize larger tears. The air stinks of burnt protein, an olfactory brand marking the night as sacred. Surgeons move with battlefield efficiency, pinching edges of gashes, pouring wine on them, pressing wads of wool. They log severe cases. 3 need cautery. 1 shows signs of faint pulse, likely to develop septicemia. They'll isolate him in a side cell. If he dies, the confraternity will sponsor masses for his soul and pay his widow's rent. Contractual mercy. By dawn, streets look deserted, except for streaks of dried crimson that municipal sweepers missed. Crows hop among them, picking at flecks. Market women lay fresh straw to hide stains before customers arrive. Life resumes, but the atmosphere hangs charged, as if the city exhaled too loudly and now waits for echo. Bakers knead dough with extra fervor. Some whisper their son joined the march in secret. They recognized his shoulders by a birthmark the torchlight made gleam like molten copper. Pride wrestles fear inside parental chests. Weeks later, civic scribes compiled reports. Crime did drop. Almsgiving spiked, but so did fevers. Physicians debate causal chains. Theologians debate efficacy of visible contrition. Bureaucrats debate street cleaning budgets. The lash always leaves paperwork in its wake. Beyond city walls, word spreads to bandit bands in Umbrian hills. They note town's lower defenses during processions. Gate guards join chants, leaving entrances thinly watched. A cunning captain plans a raid timed with next pilgrimage, counting on chaos to mask footfalls. Thus the lash breeds opportunity for sin, the economy of salvation balanced by theft, medieval yin and yang. In scholarly circles, discussions shift toward gender. Nuns petition bishops for permission to form enclosed flagellant choirs. Some receive approval under strict enclosure. Whips of knotted flax rather than iron. Wounds hidden beneath chemises. Reports leak. Certain convents incorporate self-scourging into mystical bridal rites. Lashes metaphorically engraving Christ's ring mark onto skin. Male theologians grow anxious. Female autonomy always unsettles dogma. They issue edicts curbing frequency, but letters from cloistered sisters describe clandestine continuation. Pain as private scripture women write upon themselves. Across seas, Ottoman spies in Venetian ports sketch diagrams of processional formations, misinterpreting them as militia tactics. Intelligence reports reach the Sublime Porte warning of Christian death squads. Advisors propose studying psychological leverage. Perhaps Muslim armies could mimic disciplined public self-harm to terrify Christian foes. But imams dismiss it as bid'ah, illicit innovation. Still, the idea seeds curiosity in dervish orders practicing ritual dance. They spin faster, drive nails into palms, exploring thresholds between endurance and revelation, parallel evolution born of misunderstood espionage. On the other side of the Atlantic, conquistadors bring the practice to Andean highlands. Quechua and Aymara witnesses equate self-whipping with their own ancient bloodletting to appease mountain spirits. Syncretism sprouts. During Corpus Christi, indigenous dancers wear feathered masks, strike backs with cactus spines soaked in llama blood, chanting in hybrid Latin Quechua verses. Friars panic at what they deem idolatry, yet Rome hesitates, fearing backlash. Better a half-Christian lash than open rebellion. Time marches toward modernity. Enlightenment pens attempt to close the chapter, but Romantic poets reopen it, fascinated by extremes. Byron scribbles verses imagining himself in a moonlit procession, lash a metaphor for unrequited lust. Mary Shelley sketches a Gothic scene, flagellants in storm-wrecked ruin, unwittingly awakening a dormant plague. Pain re-enters literature as aesthetic, unmoored from theology, but anchored in drama. And so, century after century, the lash mutates yet persists. Modern forensic experts examine skeletons in crypts, ossuaries, ridged vertebrae, microfractures on scapulae, collagen indicating repetitive trauma. They piece together lives of anonymous penitents, reconstructing roots through osteological GPS. Italian calcium signature, German strontium isotope from childhood diet, Spanish lead traces from adult pilgrimage. Bones become passports, proofing the itinerant nature of medieval guilt. Museums now stage immersive exhibits. VR headsets place visitors inside a 14th century procession, surround sound of chants. Haptic vests thumping to simulate lash impact without breaking skin. Patrons exit shaken. Pain sanitized yet still evocative. Curators debate ethics. Are they trivializing suffering or educating on fanatic psychology? Tickets sell out months ahead. Back in Perugia, the olive grove stands quiet. Modern traffic drones beyond, but wind still rattles silver leaves in patterns reminiscent of dried leather snapping. Archaeologists plan a dig. Rumors persist of a shallow grave where an overzealous penitent succumbed mid-rite. They hope to find DNA, reconstruct face, perhaps display it beside archival scrolls. The city council weighs tourism potential versus reputational risk. History markets well, morbidity markets better. All roads, scholarly, commercial, devotional, circle back to the same uneasy insight. Flesh is the most persuasive parchment. Ink fades, marble erodes, but scars broadcast across centuries. The flagellant procession proved that, fastening doctrine to epidermis so tightly we still feel phantom lashes in modern vocabularies. Deadline, pain point, bleeding edge. We've traded cowhide for code, but metaphors betray ancestry. And perhaps that's why new crises, pandemics, climate grief, political fracture, spark calls for collective gestures. Some activists glue hands to asphalt. Some kneel for 8-minute silences. Some tattoo slogans onto skin. Different tools, same logic. Imprint conviction upon the body so spectators cannot unsee it. Every age rediscovers the medieval lesson that nerves are conduits more reliable than sermons. So when you picture that dusty Umbrian evening, the whip rising, hymn ascending, sun descending, know you're not glimpsing a dead curiosity. You're seeing the prototype of every demonstration that ever tried to turn mortal vulnerability into communal resolve. Would you last a day in that column? Probably not. But before dismissing them as relics, ask how much of their rhythm beats in the protests you stream on your phone, in the workout that leaves your muscles screaming as penance for desk job sedation, in the tattoo needle carving your heartbreak into ink. Listen closely, and the cadence reappears. Inhale, miserere. Exhale, swing. Step, repent. Repeat. Dawn sifts through the shutters of an anatomy theater in Padua, finding glass jars where preserved hearts float like pale plums. A seminar of barber surgeons assembles. They have gathered to dissect not bodies this morning, but folklore. On the lecture table lies a scarred leather scourge confiscated from a clandestine flagellant cell 2 valleys east. Its tips are black with rusted iron and dried serum the color of garnets. The professors circle the object as though it were a rare parasite. They ask the same question parish priests do. Why do people keep returning to the lash? The surgeons pose it differently. What does chronic penance do to tendons, to marrow, to the electrical storms of the nervous system?
The senior lecturer, Maestro Farinacci, unrolls ink drawings, cross-sections of a penitent's back. Each layer of muscle bears hatch marks, first the superficial lesions, then deeper striations slicing through the latissimus dorsi, finally the fine spider lines of scar tissue knitting around spinal processes. Farinacci declares that repeated flagellation remodels flesh the way rivers carve canyons. Pain is not just endured, it is sculpted. Observers murmur. One apprentice raises a timid hand. Does the soul scar the same? A ripple of nervous laughter. Even inside a room that reeks of camphor and rationalism, the boundary between physiology and metaphysics remains porous.
While the academicians probe cause and effect, elsewhere in Italy the Inquisition hunts for a different specimen, the charismatic ringleader. In Modena, friar inquisitors raid a barn lit by tallow dips. They arrest a gaunt mason named Lorenzino, whose sermons have lured farmhands from fields and adolescents from apprenticeships into moonlit scourging. Under interrogation, he insists the Virgin appeared to him in a dream, her robe dipped at the hem with mortal blood, pleading for more. Torture screws tighten. The mason does not recant. The inquisitors consult manuals. Is he heretic or holy fool? They cannot decide, so Rome postpones judgment and quietly shelves the case. Ambivalence, it turns out, is institutional policy when the populace sees piety in every welt. Meanwhile, the lash follows trade winds. Aboard a Portuguese carrack anchored off Goa, sailors knot hemp cords in the forecastle, imitating the rituals they watched at home. Local converts, curious, ask to join. Soon, Hindu fishermen adapt coconut husk fibers and chant Sanskrit hymns to Shiva between blows, declaring the pain a doorway to cosmic fire. Jesuit fathers panic, syncretism again. They draft stern epistles to Lisbon, describing heresies with a flourish that nearly sails off the parchment. Yet they hesitate to outlaw the export. Empire thrives on spectacle, and nothing projects pious zeal to sultans and spice merchants quite like a deck slick with sailors' penitent blood. Back in Europe, waves of plague return, each visitation stoking penitential fever. Town councils, desperate to placate heaven, issue alternating edicts. One month they encourage controlled processions. Think of them as city-sanctioned catharsis. Next month they ban them, fearing infection. But the line between bodily mortification and microbial contagion blurs. Scholars compile mortality tables showing spikes of illness trailing major flagellant events. Perhaps open wounds invite pestilence. Perhaps mass gatherings spread it. Physicians draft pamphlets equating flagellation with bad air and rotten wells. Preachers counterpreach. If buboes bloom after self-scourging, that only proves God accelerates purgation. Each pustule is sin leaving the body. Science loses the argument, at least for a century or two. Pain merchants, smiths, tanners, herbalists capitalize regardless. Northern markets see a boom in penitent kits. Pre-fitted scourges with adjustable loop handles, jars of goose-fat salve, even portable wooden crosses with foldable beams for shoulder-bearing marches. An Augsburg woodcut advertises a deluxe set lined with saffron-dyed velvet for the devoted traveler of Golgotha's road. There are price tiers, much like modern athletic gear. Poor carpenters keep using knotted hemp. Wealthy notaries order Spanish leather tipped with silver barbs, etched with micro-psalms. Inequality, even in agony. Yet the lash is not merely a commodity. It becomes instrument of politics. In 1527, when imperial troops sack Rome, scattered flagellant confraternities read the event as apocalypse foretold. They declare that only extreme penance can halt the Antichrist now camped within Christendom. In Florence, Savonarola's old ghost stirs. Children parade streets collecting luxury items for bonfires of vanities, while adults warm their own blood to fever pitch. A wool dyer named Katerina persuades dozens of women to form a nocturnal circle, beating their shoulders with braided horsehair while singing lauds in contralto registers echoing through narrow alleys. Male chroniclers are scandalized, women claiming liturgical acoustics previously reserved for monks. They label it hysteria. The women shrug and keep singing, skin striped crimson beneath chemises. All the while, theological treatises pile like fallen leaves. One Franciscan, Brother Celestino, writes De Flagello Mentis, on the whip of the mind, arguing that true mortification should now move inward, contemplative agony without corporeal harm. He calls the scourge training wheels for contrition. The tract circulates among humanists, influencing Descartes' notion of internalized discipline. But among lay people, it falls flat. Thoughts don't leave visible marks, and audiences crave spectacle. Carnival banners still outsell prayer manuals. By the time printing presses clatter in every major town, broadsheets spread tales of miraculous healings linked to flagellation. One recounts a mute shepherd in Aragon who, after 77 lashes, began reciting the Magnificat. Another describes a knight cured of leprosy when his blood splashed onto a relic. Skeptics scoff, but the stories travel faster than rebuttals. If Gutenberg democratized knowledge, he also franchised superstition. The lash gains a press agent it never asked for. Eventually, civil magistrates tire of balancing public order with public fervor. In Vienna, 1600, they create a licensing system. Yearly permits for processions, capped participants, mandatory medical inspections. The city prints a color-coded badge for licensed flagellants, a red drop on white field, worn on the sleeve to distinguish them from zealots. Black market badges appear within a week. Parallel to regulation, art keeps mythologizing pain. Caravaggio paints a flagellation of Christ where ropes glow like threads of fire against bruised flesh. Spectators in the canvas lean in with unsettling fascination, mirrors for Baroque viewers. In these galleries, aristocrats experience sanitized proximity to violence, a performance one step removed, aligning them with power without bodily investment. Art as vicarious lash. Across the channel, Puritan England stares in horrified curiosity. They call continental penance popish self-murder. Yet diaries reveal that in private, some Puritans whip themselves with taws to stave off lustful thoughts. Pain proves ecumenical. Even later, in genteel Georgian parlors, the lash persists in secret societies that mingle spiritual purification with erotic thrill. Physicians secretly treat infections in places well-born ladies cannot admit they allowed leather to touch. Regency scandals brew, then dissipate into euphemism and lace. By 1800, the Enlightenment deems flagellation an atavistic relic. But revolutions spawn their own rituals. During the French Terror, self-scourging resurfaces in prisons as prisoners reenact martyr narratives. Blood on straw reminds them they are protagonists in a script older than republics. When the guillotine claims them, executioners note backs already cross-hatched, as though death merely signs an already drafted document. Modern psychologists eventually coin terms: algolagnia, conversion disorder, group catharsis. They study footage of Philippine Holy Week where penitents drag crosses along dusty roads, lacerated by shards of glass taped to ropes. Researchers measure cortisol, dopamine, collective identity scores. Papers conclude that pain plus public gaze equals euphoria. Journals cite medieval flagellants as historical antecedent. The lash, academically rehabilitated, becomes data rather than dogma. Contemporary tourism boards face a dilemma: heritage or hazard. Assisi hosts reenactment weekends, promising controlled experiences with prop scourges tipped in red dye. Critics call it penetainment, yet tickets sell out. Influencers live stream, filters smoothing artificial scars. Hashtag blessed and bruised trends for 48 hours until a controversy over unsanitary props dims interest. The lash returns to semi-obscurity, waiting for the next cultural pivot. Even medicine cannot quite escape analogy. Surgeons describe aggressive chemotherapy as going medieval on tumors. Fitness gurus brand high-intensity workouts as flagellant sessions, 30 burpees for each dietary sin. Pain remains our most immediate metaphor, because neurons do not nuance. And what of the ancient confraternities? A few persist, now charitable leagues repairing roofs, funding orphanages. But once a year, behind cathedral doors, they unseal stored scourges, chant Latin verses off fading parchment, and remind themselves where their benevolence began, in shared blood. They strike softly now, light taps more symbolic than slicing. But the gesture binds them across centuries. Afterward, they apply antiseptic wipes, sign liability forms, and return to bake sales. What survives, ultimately, is rhythm. Inhale, miserere. Exhale, swing. We hear it in protest marches' call and response, in sports stadium waves, in the anxious foot-tapping of commuters punishing themselves for lateness. The medieval lash decoded that rhythm into flesh and made time visible through wounds. We may no longer raise scourges, yet every deadline, every performance review, every self-flagellating internal monologue owes a strand of DNA to those dusty Umbrian nights. Blood on cobblestones may wash away, but the cadence clings to language, to posture, to the anxious heartbeat measuring worth against impossible grace. Night drizzle glosses the basalt lanes of Zaragoza, turning every torch-lit puddle into a jittering mirror of red and gold. Inside the cloister of San Pablo, a discreet side door opens and 15 penitents file through, their bare feet slipping on the wet stone. They have no trumpets, no banners, no public permit. Only an unwritten pact that each drop of blood spilled tonight will be matched tomorrow by a coin dropped into an alms box no one will trace. This is the 20th century now. Electricity hums in street lamp filaments outside. But the lash has found ways to survive the age of radio waves by choosing the seams of society, places too narrow for statutes, yet wide enough for need. The leader is Dr. Mendizabal, chief surgeon at the city's largest hospital. In daylight, he closes incisions with silk sutures. After Vespers, he opens his own skin with a cat of 9 dyed antiseptic blue. A colleague once spotted stripes beneath his starched collar and asked if a dog had mauled him. The doctor murmured something about a fencing accident and kept moving. None of his patients would guess that the same steady hands which repair their organs have memorized the far subtler anatomy of remorse. The safest angle to avoid the kidneys, the pressure that bruises fascia without cross-cutting veins, the soft hiss the whip makes when skill replaces force. Tonight's assembly has convened to address an ethical riddle. Can the gesture of self-sacrifice retain power once its original cosmology evaporates? One penitent, an agnostic civil engineer, claims yes. He spends his days calculating shear loads for highway bridges, assuring motorists they will not plunge into rivers. Suffering is physics, he tells the circle, uncoiling his instrument. Energy cannot be destroyed, only moved. Pain is surplus guilt transmuted into leverage for good. Another, Sister Aurelia, a nun smuggled out after curfew from the convent infirmary, disagrees. Suffering is sacrament only if granted, not taken, she whispers. But even she loosens her habit to expose shoulders, a contradictory choreography practiced for years. Their debate is postponed when a new arrival raps softly at the door. She is 21. Hair shaved at the temples in bohemian defiance, rings glinting in eyebrows. Her name is Julia. She works at a transistor factory and discovered the group through an anonymous hint scrawled inside a library Bible margin. If you seek wait, follow the cord of silence. A phrase with just enough occult perfume to magnetize the lonely. The elders study her. Younger than most penitents, politically restless, religiously ambiguous. She breezes through their catechism of intent. No erotic motive, no suicidal impulse, no external coercion. I feel loose inside, she says. I want to feel fixed. They hand her a plain hemp rope with 3 knots, initiate grade. The doctor checks her pulse, steady. Sister Aurelia smears calendula salve on her shoulders preemptively. Modern medicine has infiltrated even archaic rites. At the first crack of scourges, the cloister's vaulted ceiling throws echoes back like metallic swallows. The sounds braid into a ragged metronome, whistle, thud, gasp, shuffle, drip. For Mendizabal, rhythm shades into anesthesia. He counts heartbeats instead of lashes, monitoring the group's collective vitals. The engineer marks time by reciting logarithmic tables, each decimal point punctuated by sting. Julia, the novice, begins tentatively, whip barely grazing her skin, until Sister Aurelia leans in and mutters the old paradox. Harder means sooner finished. Julia steels herself, raises the cord higher, and when it lands, the surprise in her own throat is louder than the strike. Pain, unimagined, has a voice. Outside, a passing policeman pauses at the cloister wall, hearing muffled chant. He suspects clandestine political plotting. Franco's censors grow paranoid by the week, but chooses not to investigate. The civil guard receives a monthly donation envelope from Mendizábal labeled Medical Relief Fund. Courtesies trade in many currencies. The procession thus remains invisible, a medieval relic cohabiting with radio towers and propaganda loudspeakers. Yet invisibility breeds its own scandals. 3 months later, a patient under Mendizábal's knife bleeds out unexpectedly. Rumors spark. The doctor's hands trembled that day, as though taxed by other nightly labors. The hospital board launches a discreet inquiry, unearthing nothing but impeccable case files. But tabloids need no evidence. They run a lurid headline, "Flagellant Surgeon" or "Butcher," complete with a woodcut collage of hooded silhouettes. Confraternity members panic. Secrecy is their spine. They debate dissolving, but dissolution would orphan the very wounded souls who cling to them for structure. To consult history, they dispatch 2 scholars, one a Jesuit archivist, the other a secular ethnomusicologist, to wander monastery libraries across Castile, copying statutes of extinct confraternities. The documents read like half-coded diaries, fines for tardiness measured in lashes, bylaws on lending scourges to neighboring parishes, even recipes for wound salves, honey, myrrh, crushed rose petals, pain both inflicted and soothed by gardens. One parchment entreats members never to flog within earshot of pregnant women, lest rhythmic cries disturb the unborn. Another orders weekly laundering of robes in rainwater to prevent putrefactive miasma. Regulations reveal pragmatism beneath zeal. They understood infection long before germ theory, just by counting funerals. But history also offers cautionary tales. The archivist unrolls a brittle decree from 1484 Castile after anti-plague flagellants slaughtered livestock they deemed carriers of sin, collapsing local economies. Another scroll recounts how rogue penitents in Avignon set fires to purify alleys, burning entire bakeries. Fanaticism feeds on unchecked conviction, and this present circle, though measured, now senses public fear mutating its image. They pivot. Instead of retreating, they go semi-public on their own terms, aligning with Red Cross blood donation drives. A poster appears. "Your vein can heal. Offer a drop." Beneath the slogan, silhouettes kneel, not scourging, but extending arms to phlebotomy tubes. The media reframes the group as charitable eccentrics. Mendizábal organizes voluntary pain relief clinics where penitents channel augmented pain tolerance into sitting for extended transfusions, drawing record volumes for burn victims. Newspapers swoon. Martyrs give life, literally. Moral repackaging succeeds. The lash remains backstage, but its narrative sells compassion instead of morbidity. Julia, now experienced, leads youth outreach. She teaches breathing techniques to manage discomfort, borrowed from yoga manuals and medieval prayer guides alike. Her workshops blend neurotransmitter science with mystic poetry. Serotonin meets Saint Catherine of Siena. Attendees, many from the underground art scene, discover there is discipline beneath their anarchic tattoos, a choreography marrying vintage guilt with present activism. One emerges saying, Hurting wisely is different from hurting blindly. Yet fissures appear. The engineer confesses he no longer feels contrition. The lash became mere arithmetic. Guilt, like any currency, deflates. Sister Aurelia's superiors order her to cease nighttime excursions, fearing scandal. She defies the order once, then twice, before capitulating. She stands at her convent window during processions, pressing nails into palms until crescent half-moons bloom. A clandestine compromise. Meanwhile, the surgeon's health falters. Decades of microhemorrhages, compounded by late-night whiskey gargled to dull throbbing ribs, leave his immune system rag-thin. One winter, pneumonia grips him. In fever dreams, he envisions the lash not as enemy, but as jealous lover. Resentful, he cannot rise from bed to greet it. He whispers litanies to empty air, apologizing. On the 12th day, he dies. Hospital staff find beneath his pillow a folded letter bequeathing his scourge to Julia for cultural preservation. At the funeral, held in a crypt chapel, the confraternity gathers disguised as ordinary mourners. No cords, only dark coats. But as the coffin lowers, a low humming begins, wordless, weaving the old miserere into a single sustained note like a sine wave, barely audible to outsiders. Eyes glisten, backs itch with phantom memory. When the priest sprinkles holy water, droplets on the wood look disturbingly like blood. The surgeon's death fractures hierarchy. Julia inherits informal leadership but feels imposter terror. Institutions usually evolve gradually. Here, authority is slapped into her hands like a live coal. She travels to Manila's Holy Week to study living passion rituals. Under humid sky, she witnesses men shave crowns of thorns into their scalps. Others voluntarily crucified with real nails, though medics wait offstage. She interviews participants. Some seek absolution, others viral fame. Cell phone cameras flash among drips of sweat. Authenticity has mutated into performance metrics. Julia returns to Spain unsettled, wondering whether her own group is sliding the same slope. She proposes a moratorium on physical scourging, 30 days of silence. Instead, members will copy medieval penitential psalms by hand, donating manuscripts to hospital chapels. The vote is split. Traditionalists argue muscle memory is scripture. The body can transcribe what the pen cannot. Progressives cheer the pause. Backs can finally heal. Yet on the first scheduled silent night, thunder cracks, and the old rhythm resumes unbidden. Wind through cloister arches sounds eerily like swinging chords. A handful of veterans, engineer included, resume clandestine strikes, claiming the storm's cacophony masks their ritual. Julia discovers them mid-session. Confrontation erupts. The question is no longer theology, but governance. Can a community founded on voluntary pain survive without compulsory unity? The clash pushes Julia into archival rabbit holes. She learns medieval confraternities sometimes employed disciplinantes, designated lashmasters, rotating weekly to maintain uniform pace and prevent escalation. Regulation, not abolition, preserved cohesion. She resurrects the office, appointing rotating monitors armed with doctor-approved scourges sterilized after each use, signed out like library books. The compromise calms factions. Rhythm resumes under seat-belted moderation. Pain in measured dosage, morphine of the soul. But curiosity from academia returns. A psychology professor petitions to observe sessions with infrared cameras to study group heart rate coherence. The request divides them again: transparency versus voyeurism. Ultimately, they allow one session, blindfolding the researcher to location. His published paper finds remarkable synchronicity of cardiac rhythms, akin to choir singers or combat squads. Headlines proclaim flagellants achieve biofeedback harmony. Wellness influencers co-opt the phrase, selling smartwatch apps that buzz users' wrists in time with Gregorian samples. The lash becomes algorithm. Capital follows. A startup approaches Julia. License the confraternity's brand for an immersive VR penance experience, complete with haptic vests simulating whip impact at safe intensities. Investors throw euros at the pitch. Julia, after nights of insomnia, declines. To replicate pain without risk of infection is tempting, but she smells heresy of a new kind: suffering as subscription. Pressure escalates when an investigative journalist leaks footage of an underage boy accepted into a session, though house rules forbid minors. Public outcry roars. Authorities issue cease and desist orders. Insurance companies threaten lawsuits. Julia faces camera crews asking why she endorses violence. She replies with impossible nuance. We preserve a language older than rhetoric, spoken in scar tissue because vocabulary fails. Sound bites butcher the nuance. Internal meeting. Vote to disband or retreat deeper underground. Sister Aurelia, now frail and remote, writes a letter read before the assembly. When the lash becomes purely private, it risks vanity. When it becomes spectacle, it risks blasphemy. Therefore, wield it only as translation, pain into mercy. The phrase sways just enough. They choose neither dissolution nor public pivot, but pilgrimage. Within weeks, packed bags rattle on a night train toward Monte Sant'Angelo, the cave shrine where medieval penitents once crawled miles on bleeding knees. The plan? Temporary retreat, ritual in original context, recalibration. Along the route, carriages pass LED-lit billboards advertising synthetic lash toys for couples. Holy kink! Irony stings sharper than cords. Inside the mountain grotto, cold mineral air condenses on shoulders. Here, even whispers ricochet like stones. The group kneels on gravel. Julia notices first the chilling absence. Pain here feels redundant. The cave itself flays vanity. Stalactites drip centuries. Inscriptions in Latin plead for intercession. Their own whips dangle limp. They realize that sometimes the proper scourge is simply silence in a place that dwarfs the ego. With dawn light monochrome through limestone, they exit strangely weightless. A vote passes. Indefinite hiatus on corporal penance. Community work will continue, but the lash is sheathed. Months later, back home, members still meet weekly for breath-synchronized prayer, hands open, backs unmarked. Some yearn for the adrenaline spike, but most feel relief. They catalog archival scourges, donate them to a museum under anonymity. Tempered steel tips glint beneath display glass, finally inert. Visitors read plaques and shiver. Grateful distance protects them. Yet, on Good Friday, Julia receives a letter, no return address, sealed with crimson wax, stamped by an archaic confraternity crest unseen for 3 centuries. Inside, a single sentence: "Rhythm sleeps, never dies." She feels phantom stripes prickle on her skin. Habit is devout. Will she wake the lash again someday? Perhaps. For now, she tucks the letter into a drawer, inhales, and lets the backbeat rest. Moonless air hangs heavy above the old rail yard on the outskirts of Valencia, a place where freight containers rust in quiet lines and graffiti blooms like sea anemones on corrugated steel. 43 years have passed since Mendizábal's funeral, and the confraternity that once bled beneath torchlight has learned to survive by molting again and again, each new skin stranger than the last. Tonight they gather in a gutted carriage whose wheels were lifted decades ago. The metal shell rocks gently on cinder block stilts whenever a coastal breeze rolls in. Only the hiss of distant highway traffic testifies to civilization. Inside, a single LED lantern throws pale cones across plywood benches, illuminating 18 faces that span 3 generations. Julia's hair is silver now, cut short, eyes sharked behind rimless lenses. Somewhere along the route from insurgent novice to reluctant matriarch, she earned a doctorate in comparative ritual studies, published a volume of poetry, and lost 2 vertebrae to arthritis, caused, according to orthopedic scans, by repetitive thoracic stress. She claims not to miss the lash, but every humid summer her scars swell and scold her for retirement. To younger members, she is simply La Cartographa, the map maker, because she alone remembers all the iterations of the group: the clandestine whip nights, the blood donation campaigns, the silent manuscript vigils, the limestone cave epiphany. She keeps their timeline filed like surgical slides inside her skull, ready to lift any shard beneath the microscope of conscience. Across from her sits Ernesto, age 22, born the year the lash was first archived. He wears wireless earbuds around his neck and a biometric band on each wrist. His generation arrived through the door labeled Mindful Pain Management. They grew up with mobile apps that ping repetitive breathing reminders and measure galvanic skin response. They crave intensity because daily life, curated by algorithms, feels frictionless and insulting. Ernesto has never been whipped, at least not by leather. His chosen crucible is a custom VR rig that routes haptic pulses along his spine in patterns derived from 17th century flagellant liturgies. He calls it soma coding, translating contrition into code. The elders worry he's building a carnival funhouse where the mirrors flatter rather than convect. He insists he's forging the next missile. Tonight's agenda is impossible. Decide whether the confraternity will endorse Ernesto's open-source platform, which could invite tens of thousands of remote participants, anonymous, unsupervised, possibly underage, into a ritual lineage that once required months of discernment and a physician's oversight. A QR-encoded invite has already leaked into fringe forums. Access requests ping Ernesto's server every few seconds, digital knuckles rapping. Julia called the emergency session before the dam bursts. She opens with a question older than both electricity and parchment. When my skin is torn, whose soul is stitched? Silence fans outward. At the rear of the carriage, Father Mateo, one of only 2 ordained priests still active, closes his eyes. He knows theology alone no longer anchors this collective. Half the room does not share his creed. Still, the grammar of sacrifice haunts them, whether they name its subject God, cosmos, dopamine, or shame. Ernesto clears his throat. The lantern glare flares against his nose ring. We're gatekeeping an experience that can help people regulate trauma, he says. Neuroscience shows controlled nociception triggers endorphin release, promotes neuroplastic healing. Virtual delivery removes infection risk. No blood, no scars, same catharsis.
He taps his tablet. A wireframe avatar appears, tiny red dots sprinting across a grid to simulate lash impacts over time. We can calibrate amplitude to medical questionnaires, tailor intensity, suspend sessions if vitals spike. An older woman, Mercedes, retired accountant, survivor of clerical abuse, leans forward. Pain sterilized is pain neutralized, she says. Our lineage is not a spa treatment. The blood meant something because we couldn't click undo. You speak of dosage like vitamins. I'm speaking of consent, Ernesto snaps back. We inherit an act that courted infection, tetanus, sepsis. Why worship pathogens? You taught me discipline seeks the good, not the grotesque. Julia lifts a hand, palm downward. Gavel without hammer. Let's ground ourselves, she murmurs. 3 breaths together. The railcar's thin walls inhale creaks, exhale quiet. Breathing synchronizes. Old flagellant trick. The body's metronome settles rhetoric. She resumes. When the lash was archived, we made a covenant. Never again strike flesh unless 3 criteria align: an examined conscience, medical clearance, and communal witness. Anything less risks spectacle. The question, does digital transfer honor or dilute that covenant? Ernesto gestures to his wrists. These bands log heart rhythms to a shared ledger. Every session uploads anonymized data. Community witness in the cloud. He pauses, softer. I grew up reading your field notes, Julia. Your generation reframed the lash as language. Let mine translate the alphabet. At this, the carriage door squeals open and a latecomer climbs aboard, Lynn, a Vietnamese graduate student in robotics. She bows and takes the vacant seat near the lantern. Sorry, I was configuring the prototype, she says, unveiling a cylindrical device resembling a sleek espresso machine. It weaves compressed air bursts through a mesh of flexible actuators. No mechanical pistons, nothing that can break skin. She fingers the control panel. A barely audible pop, then a gust of air snaps against her forearm, reddening the flesh without abrasion. Intensity scales exponentially. At level 8, it feels like your bones hum. Whispers ripple, a hymn to futurism and fear. Julio, ex-Navy chaplain, crosses himself unconsciously. Mercedes mutters, "Air leaves no mark. How will remorse remember?" Julia feels dual loyalties tug. Protect the tradition from sterilization, protect the seekers from contagion. Age has taught her that heritage without adaptation petrifies into museum trivia, yet adaptation without anchor dissolves into gimmick. She reaches inside her coat and withdraws Mendizabel's scourge. Fraying handle, 9 stiff cords tipped with knotted tin beads. Gasps. The relic emerges only on thresholds. I keep this not to glorify cruelty, she says, voice catching, but to remind us that technology once meant techne, craft at service of truth. This was state-of-the-art for its era. Today, we hold different tools. Question is, does the truth shift with the tools? She passes the scourge down the row. Each member holds it, not swinging, just feeling weight. When it reaches Ernesto, he cradles it like a bone flute. Eyes glassy, he says, "My algorithm can't replicate this heft. The anticipation before the strike, the smell of oiled leather." He hands it to Lynn. She flinches as the tin knots brush her palm. Julia speaks again. We stand on a riverbank. Behind us, blood in the water. Ahead, a silver current of data. We can dam it, drown in it, or build a bridge. But a bridge must rest on bedrock. What remains non-negotiable?
Father Mateo answers, surprising himself, vulnerability. He removes a small wooden cross from his pocket. Whether iron tips or air bursts, the heart must risk fracture. Without that, we're tourists. Murmurs of assent. Even Mercedes nods.
Julia proposes a test. Blend eras in a single rite. Candidates will wear the haptic vest and grasp a miniature scourge, thin cords dipped in red ink rather than metal. They'll feel the digital sting while seeing pigment mark their skin. Psychosomatic synergy. No broken dermis, but visible reminder. Afterward, participants will journal reflections in longhand with quill pens, ink mixing with sweat. Analog still has teeth.
They set date, Easter Vigil, 2 weeks hence, inside this same rail car retrofitted as pop-up chapel. Ernesto will code a loop derived from the Miserere chant's waveform. Air bursts timed to the psalm's peaks. Amplitude guided by biometric feed. Lynn will monitor vitals. Mercedes volunteers to brew the ink from beet juice and medical dye. Crimson under lantern light, washable by dawn. Consent forms drafted. Emergency medic kit stocked. Tradition meets transistor. Easter night arrives like velvet stretched across the sky, pierced by distant port cranes blinking red. The rail yard emptiness feels post-apocalyptic, perfect stage for resurrection experiments. Inside the carriage, the prototype aerodiscipline unit hums gentle as a sleeping cat. 6 volunteers, 4 novices, 2 veterans, stand bare-shouldered, vests snug. Julia watches heart rate graphs bloom on Lynn's tablet, neon petals opening, closing.
Ernesto dimmers the lantern, starts the loop. A bass drone, human voices pitch-shifted until almost tectonic, fills the hull. On the first Miserere mai Deus, air bursts crack along vest channels. Faces tighten, but no screams. Red ink quills glide across forearms, tracing each impact. Visual evidence where sensors leave none.
Second stanza, bursts quicken. Novice #3, a software tester named Ricardo, wobbles. Lynn taps screen. System auto-throttles. Ricardo steadies, breathes. Mercedes sprays lavender mist, a scent historically used in plague processions to mask the rot. Nostalgia merged with aromatherapy. Julia chants under breath, Latin syllables woven through arthritic pain under her ribs.
Stanza 5. Apex. The algorithm lifts amplitude into near burn. Eyes close, tears slip. At crescendo, lights cut to black. Silence. The machine idles. Vests deflate. Only breathing and the keening of harbor wind. Julia strikes a match, lights a beeswax candle, the oldest tech in the room. In its glow, red ink streaks look like fresh wounds. None can deny what just transpired.
They sit, legs numb, backs tingling. Father Mateo lays a linen cloth on floor. One by one, volunteers place their quills upon it, a symbolic offertory. Then something unexpected. Ricardo speaks, voice ragged. I felt data become flesh. He lifts his arm, red stripes glisten. Pain guided by code, but received by nerve. It humbled me. I thought algorithms mastered me at work, but tonight they served me. No, served us. Mercedes, tears catching wrinkles, whispers, "If the machine had failed, ink alone would mock us. If ink bled without sting, vanity." Together they conversed. She presses a kiss to the linen, a sacrament forged of silicon and beetroot. Outside, dawn stains the eastern horizon saffron. Nightbirds scatter. Ernesto powers down the device, but before sealing the lid, he removes its circuit board, slides it into a velvet pouch. Hardware ages, he says. Firmware updates. But this stays. He taps the board, a mosaic of solder traces, microchips. Another relic for a future generation to caress with trepidation. Julia exhales. Her shoulders ache not from lashes, but from holding history together like cracked porcelain. She realizes the real inheritance is not pain, nor its instruments, but the practice of perpetual translation, fidelity to some unnamed ache that refuses extinction. The confraternity survived plagues, fascism, clickbait. It survives because it keeps asking, what hurts now and how can hurt become harvest? She turns to the circle. We recorded biosignals tonight, waveforms of contrition. Let's publish them under Creative Commons, but attach a license. Anyone may use, provided they meet in person at least once a year, break bread, wash each other's ink away. Laughter, gentle, approving. Even the digital must kneel to flesh occasionally. Decision reached. The confraternity will endorse Ernesto and Lynn's platform, renamed Corda, Latin for both hearts and chords. Beta launch restricted, with guardianship protocols. Each virtual session paired with a mentor who reads journals, prays, or meditates in tandem thousands of kilometers away. Not control, companionship. Before dispersing, they gather in a circle. Julia lifts Mendizabal's scourge one final time. Symbol, she says, laying it on the floor like a sheathed sword. Mercedes pours remaining red ink over the cords. Streaks bloom, then drip onto plywood, a last imitation of blood. Father Mateo blesses with sign of cross, but adjusts the words, not to sanctify violence, but to repurpose it. The exit into pastel sunrise. Cranes stand like steel penitents against sky. Ernesto locks the carriage. Inside, the scourge dries into silence. He pockets the key, but Julia's palm closes over his hand. Don't lose it, she says. Some future dawn, you may need to open that door again. He nods. On the walk back to town, they pass a billboard for a luxury gym promising pain without risk. Julia laughs, a sound like gravel turning into gulls. Risk, she thinks, is the marrow. But risk can migrate form without dying. Tonight they proved it. Weeks later, in an apartment in Seoul, a young woman slips on a haptic vest shipped from Valencia. She syncs with a mentor in Lima, journals ready. When the bursts begin, they sting like truth. New language, ancient grammar. Across oceans, pulses align. And somewhere beyond algorithms, beyond scars, the old chant stirs, no longer begging mercy, but offering it, carried on circuits, on breath, on whatever bridge humanity builds next across the chasm between wound and wonder.